Hello. This video is going to discuss the import-export functionality, which is new with version 2.105. There are cases where configuration will not be available, causing Simpli list views to fail. An example of this is where we have Simpli list views installed in a production environment and a new clean sandbox is created where no data is exported with the sandbox. This means that Simpli list views won't have any configuration, and so any attempt to use it will fail. What I've done here as an example is I have faked out this org from a config perspective. And so if we were to refresh this page, what we'll see is that it will complain that the global config is not available. When this happens, what we're going to want to do is go across to the list views admin page, which is going to show us the same error, but one card will still be available to us to be able to import, export, or create configuration. The create button is really used where it's not important that custom information, custom actions, list views is imported into the sandbox. If we just want to use the sandbox and there's functionality which Simpli list views provides us where we need to move forward, this is a good way of accomplishing that. Of course, if the list views for pages require those custom configurations, then of course that information will need to be imported. But to start, just to move forward, what we can do is we can just click the create button, and what happens is the global configuration gets created, the page gets refreshed, and you can see all the global information, global configuration as it becomes available. The sandbox or any environment where we create a new configuration will always have its initialization set to false, so list views will need to be initialized once the global config has been created. If we try and click the create button again, it will come back and give us an error that the global config already exists. If we decide that we need all of the configuration being brought in from an environment, including the custom information, what we will need to do is go into that org and perform an export. Now, before I do that, I created a little slide to show the information that gets exported and imported. So what we've got here is the stuff that does and the stuff that doesn't on the right-hand side. Custom list views get imported, okay, along with their configurations, and then all actions will get imported as well, whether they are core or custom. What doesn't get imported are core list views. The reason why for this is that there are some orgs that have 10 or 15,000 list views, and this is just, and they're all core, and they can be recreated by reinitializing Simpli list views. So it just makes no sense for them to come across or to be brought across. The data would be just too big, and then really exporting and importing of tables will be required in this instance. What's also not brought across are the core configurations for those list views, and then user configuration does not get brought over either. So sort orders and pinned views are not brought over. Of course, these can be exported and imported as mentioned by doing table loads. So that is a way of solving that problem. So if we want to bring over all of our custom list views, actions, etc., what we would do is we'd click the export button and we would save the file. That file typically will get called export.slv. And what we'll do is if we go and we have a look at that file inside of Notepad, it really just is a JSON file where the objects are put into a map, and then that map is serialized into JSON format. So it is, depending on your org, it might be quite large, depending on how many actions, custom list views, etc. you may have. Now that you have that file, what you can then do is go to your other org, your sandbox org, or whatever one where you're wanting to import your data. And by clicking the import button, it's going to ask you for the file. So you go and choose the file that you need to import, double click, and it will automatically start trying to process the files, or the file. So what we've done here is display that everything was processed successfully. Now, of course, how the records are processed is that even if an individual config action or list view fails, it is still going to continue processing all the other ones and commit those if those are inserted appropriately and correctly. So what we can see here, and this is an example, we have object success failures. So we have the object name, how many successes there were, how many failures there were. Now, this does do an upsertion, so it tries to determine whether there is already a list view config or action in the system which matches the one that's being provided. If it is, it just performs an update on that record. Okay. And so as you can see here, I had 13 custom list views imported, none of them failed. I had 13 configurations imported, none of them failed, and I had 19 actions committed, and none of them failed. If some of them do fail, we can set the debugging to yes, and we can run it again. Once the processing has completed, we can then go into the list view logs to go and view more details about what may be wrong. Many different things can go wrong when importing, and so it would make sense. We can't sit here and talk about all those issues. So that is the new functionality regarding importing and exporting of data. It is definitely the case that we can use this functionality if we have created some configuration and we want to just move it into a different org. Let's say we've created a list view with a bunch of configuration, maybe some actions, and we want to move those to another sandbox environment. We can use the import-export functionality. So what we would need to do here is to open up the JSON, and we would need to find those actions. For example, if we're moving actions across that needed to be, or that we would like to import, and get rid of everything else. So now, of course, we need to keep our JSON correct, but what we could do is go to the very bottom of the file, get rid of everything else. Okay, so you can see here that I just have one action in this export file now, and let's say that was the only action that I wanted to import. What I could then do was import that one file, double click, and you can see here that the file was imported successfully, the list view 0, config 0, and actions 1 was successful. So that's the export-import functionality.